Leviticus. That's something we don't preach on a whole lot, Leviticus. That's not one of those we just kind of dip into every now and then. Chock full of the law. A punch bowl cake. I mean, love it, but she didn't write down the recipe before she died. So the recipe went away with her. I remember how it looked. I remember how it tasted. But for the life of me, I can't recreate it. It's one of those things where it's out there. How many of y'all have great memories of recipes that your grandparents or your moms and dads made? That I've tried and I've tried and I've tried to build it back again, but it don't taste the same. You could be using the same amount of ingredients, but it won't taste the same. Right. Your spiritual life also is much and likened into that because, and let me show you how much prevalent that was in Jesus' day. Jesus told all those that were listening to him, he said, listen, I didn't come to destroy the law, I come to fulfill the law. Okay? There was some real smart, legalistic people there. Okay, I'm going to tell you. They had, I guess Jesus was probably talking to some of the geniuses of the law that was before him. These people are smart. They thought they knew the law. They assumed they knew the law. They thought there was no way they didn't know the law. Therefore, when Jesus told them, listen, I didn't come here to destroy the law. I come here to fulfill the law. It went right over their little bitty heads. And they're the smartest people in the law there is. Right? And grandma and mama is smarter than me in some of those recipes that I can't recreate. Okay? All right? That's the truth of life. You got to understand something about the Bible when it comes to the law. Anytime we're reading the law as believers, we sometimes don't have a sense of what the law is actually teaching us when we read it because we just can't, in our minds, function and recreate that. Okay, I'm going to show you an illustration of that this morning. Hopefully, we'll get to it because it's kind of hard. Leviticus 8 and 24 is talking about here. It's talking about basically the priest offerings, things that are happening with the priest, things that ought to be done with the priest. This is Moses telling everybody about the law, what needs to be done in light of those things, okay? In verse 24, he says, and he brought Aaron's sons and Moses, and Moses put of the blood upon the tip of their right ear, and upon the thumbs of their right hands, upon the great toes of their right feet, and Moses sprinkled the blood upon the altar round about. Father in heaven, we thank you so much, dear God. It's hard to focus this morning, Father. It really is for me too. There's so many things happening around us at this very moment. People hurting, people don't know why these things had to happen. Lanny being sick, the changes we're having to do to get that accomplished for him. It's a very difficult moment, Father. So help us to focus this morning, Father. And I believe if we'll focus on your word, that, Father, you might be able to teach us a little bit about what your will and purpose is in our lives. Hide me behind the cross. Have me speak the word in a way that be pleasing unto thee. And we ask this in Jesus' precious name. You can close the door for me, Vicki? Thank you. They've been in a good mood in Missy's class this morning. I don't know what you was doing in there, Missy, but my goodness, it sounded wild. They were just in a great mood this morning, and I was laughing in the foyer, and I was thinking, boy, she's got her hands full in there right now with us. But they're having a good time. Here's what happens in life. That sometimes I don't think we're in such of a habit of ministering. If you don't know what you do as a Christian, you are a minister to the world, really, in essence. You are ministering to the world. You are serving in the world. You are doing in the world what Christ would have you to do. Okay. But sometimes when we're ministering, I think sometimes we just assume as we're ministering that that's what we do, and there's nothing else. For instance, I had, in 2011, I woke up on a Sunday morning to hearing my grandson had passed away from SIDS, 2 months. Never will forget. Robin got the phone call from Nick. They had went to Houston to Sarah's parents' house to have some time that weekend. And Nick called his mom, told him that Waylon passed away. And we were in such a habit of getting up every morning and just going and doing. See, we've been ministering a long time by that time. Me and Robin ministered to a lot of people. We were constantly ministering. So we never knew what it felt like to be kind of on the other side of that, really, honestly. So Robin got her clothes together. Her and Teresa ran down to Houston to get with Nick and Sarah and try to help them through this process and everything that was happening. They lived here, but they were down there, which made it more disconcerting. I was preaching in Sandy Creek in Bronson, which is 41 minutes away. Y'all are even better than them. I only about 25 minutes to here, but it's about 41 minutes to Bronson. And Robin says, what are you going to do? And I knew I had nobody to replace me. I said, I'm going to go and preach because I feel like that's what we ought to do. And she said, well, I'm going to go with Teresa down there. And I said, I'll be praying for y'all, And I tried to put that out of my head. I did everything I could to try to move that back to some other areas so I could get focused enough to come in and preach that morning. And I did preach that morning, but boy, it was difficult. It's still difficult talking about it and just doing it. But I remember talking to Catherine. It was much later on. Catherine was one of my deaconesses. We didn't have a deacon at that time, Brother Ben. I had 2 deaconesses at that time that helped me out with church function. They were kind of small church. And I was telling Catherine the very next week, I said, you know what? I've never been on that side of the law. And she said, what do you mean been on that side of the law? I said, I've always been on that side ministering to people, not giving a singular thought about what that meant or what that does. And I said, I'd never been on that side that's where I had to be ministered to instead of minister for others. And I said, it scared me to death, to be honest with you. And it's still scaring me. At the time we just buried Waylon, I was telling her, I said, it's still scaring me, in a lot of ways. I was sitting with Lanny Thursday morning. I think it was Thursday morning. He had his surgery Wednesday, didn't he? It was Thursday morning. And Lanny went to crying on me. Now, I'm a strong man, but I can't have Lanny crying on me. Lanny went to crying, and he said to me, because he was thinking about, Lanny too, has apparently never been on that side of the law. He never been on this side of the law. And he says, I'm sorry. And I said, no, do not apologize. I said, don't you apologize for that. I said, Lanny, you've just been ministering all your life and you never have You never have known what it even felt like to be ministered to. And it's scary, ain't it? And he said, yeah, it's scary. I said, absolutely, it's scary. It's a scary thing to be ministered to when you're doing ministry all the time. And you're ministering to others all the time. And doing for others all the time. And I thought about Leviticus 8 and 24, something that said there. Most people won't even go back to those type of things, but I went to searching, boy, once I felt it. Once I feel something that scares me that I don't have a particular mind thought toward, I go digging. Y'all know me. I'm going to find out what that booger's all about because I don't want to be put in that position again because that's a little bit scary, not knowing what that actually felt like in a real sense until that very moment. And I said, boy, if somebody ever goes through this again, I want to know. And I told Laney, I said, Laney, there's hope for you. Because if you're scared, that's exactly where you need to be. Okay? But God's going to have something for you in all this. And I told him, I said, don't you worry about a thing. Everything's going to work out. I said, but I said, laying in the bed and looking up at others is a whole lot different than somebody laying in the bed and you praying over them as they're laying in bed. I never gave a thought about standing up at somebody's bed before that time and praying with people. But now when I go pray with people, I sit down and get eye level with them. Because that's scary. It's like, oh my gosh, he's here and he's praying over me. How bad is this, How bad is this going to get? It reminded me of something in Leviticus that I'd read most of my life. I've always challenged myself to not only know the New Testament, but I've always challenged myself also to try to understand. Because Jesus said this. He said, I didn't come to destroy any of the law. I come to fulfill all the law. So therefore, it's incumbent upon me to know what he meant by that. Because listen, everybody missed it in his day. There's nobody got that. All right? Nobody got that. Now, since we have the New Testament now, we can have a lot better knowledge. But to do that, we're going to have to dip a little bit back into the Old Testament and try to figure out what was actually going on at this moment in verse 24. Okay? All right? Let's do that. Let's talk a little bit about verse 24. What it meant in its day. Okay. When the priest and Aaron and his sons were being consecrated to be ministers. They're consecrated to be ministers, okay? Like you and me, we're ministers, whether you know it or not. If you're a Christian today, you're a minister today, okay? Because we serve others. We serve others for the love of Christ, all right? But in that day, when they were consecrated, one of the things that Moses was commanded to do was to smear the blood offering on their right ear, okay? He smeared it on their right ear, okay? Their right thumb and the great toe of their... They'd have been confused with my foot because my second toe is much longer than my first toe, which is the great toe then. It's the big toe. We call it the big toe today. I'll tell you a marvelous story sometime about the big toe. This was done, okay? This was done to remind the priest that he was consecrated, okay, to God. The priest was being consecrated to God, all right, to be in covenant with God, and to be in covenant with God alone and no others, all right? He's being consecrated, all right? It's the same thing as our baptism of today. When we do our baptism, we're being consecrated in Christ. We're basically telling the whole world that we believe that Christ died for our sins. Okay, so baptism, this is a consecration toward the priest, all right? The ear was done so that they would never, ever forget to hear God's voice. All right? We learned that in other parts of the Bible. Okay? To never forget to hear God's voice, the ear. The thumb was done so they should always remember to perform the works of righteousness for God. The thumb was done so that they would know whatever works you do it for God. All right? Your hands are to be for God. All right? And you say, well, what about his great toe? His great toe reminded them how important it was that they should walk in God's ways. So it had purpose, didn't it? All right? Then we have Jesus much later on coming about. He said, I didn't come to I didn't come to destroy the law. I come to fulfill the law. Okay? Let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about how Jesus might have fulfilled the law in that essence. For the most part, us serving God, I'd say probably 99% of your life is going to be ministering to somebody else as a Christian. I will say that. There is times when people get really, really sick toward the end of their lives that they can't no longer, and then they get ministered to instead of ministering to others. But for the most part of your life, you're going to go about doing what Christ wants you to do, ministering to other people. That's what your job is. If we have a job, it's to minister others on the behalf of Christ. It's to take care of those that are on the behalf of Christ. We are to be faithful to hear God's voice, busy to work the righteousness of Christ as we go about our business every day, and to walk the best way we can to be so that when we get to heaven someday, God can look down on us and say, in her, I'm well pleased. That's our role. And I'll tell you, we do that, way, way, way more than we get ministered to. Okay. Very seldom do we get that back in a lot of ways. We are ministering. And in so many ways. But it got me thinking, what happens when you're on the other side of that situation? Like Lanny now and me so long ago. What happens when you get on that other side? If this is such a key to Aaron and his sons, and they were commanded to do these things all the time, okay? And they were taught to rely on God and have a healthy reliance on God, and therefore we'll go out and we'll do what God wants us to do because we got God's back, don't we? We're Christians, we got God's back. We're going to go out and do what we're supposed to do for Christ each and every moment. But what happens when it gets turned on its face and then all of a sudden we can't? Or it's impossible to find it in some ways. But it got me thinking, though, what would God do? Okay. Because I always turn it back on its head. If there's something that confuses me about the Bible, I go back and say, well, what did Jesus say about it? Or what would God do at this moment? If he was getting ministered to. And then I thought, that's stupid. God ain't never been ministered to. He's God. He don't get sick, does he? Does he? Was not Jesus a man? You think he might have got sick along the way? I think he would have. Probably did. And all of us do. All of us get sick at different times. Surely it was turned on its head. We don't have too much of view of that. But I know he was God and I know he was man. That means he suffered everything that I suffered through as man. So I know that he must have got sick sometime. There must have been a time when Jesus was little. Do y'all believe his mama took care of him when he couldn't take care of himself when he was a baby? But first inclination is he's God. He don't get sick. Okay? He's God, so there ain't no way he gets sick. You know, and we think that way. And we continue to do that. Except for one instance in the Bible where we know exactly the truth about that. Go to Mark chapter 15, verse 21. I didn't tell Carrie, so she probably won't know about this. 15, verse 21. Jesus is being crucified, or about to be crucified. He was in need of being ministered to. Let me just say, Jesus has suffered. He has been scourged in a lot of ways. He's been whipped. He's been stripped of his clothing. He has been punished heavily up to this point, okay? If there's ever a man that needs a little help, I would think he needs a little bit of help right there. Mark 15, verse 21. And then they strapped this cross to him and tie him to it, and he's on his way. But he's not making good time. In fact, he's so weak at this moment, he can barely walk. And along the way, he came to Simon, a Cyrenian. Let's look at verse 21. And they compelled one Simon, a Cyrenian, who passed by, coming out of the country, the father of Alexander and Rufus, to bear his cross. It's actually one of the only times we have recorded in the Bible where God was ministered to. So this is an important event that's happening right here, okay? We all remember the story of Simon, the man of Cyrene, that bore the cross of Jesus to Calvary, where he would be crucified. What basically happened was Jesus, being as a condemned man about to die, was expected to carry the burden of his conviction to the cross to be crucified. It was his duty. The judgment of the court was, it was his duty to bear his cross to the place of his burial. Now, there's a lot of people speculation going on and on, but I'm going to tell you just how it was, because we have through other events. At that time, Josephus is one. There's many other Jews that wrote on the actions of people carrying people to the cross to where they would be crucified. Okay, there's a lot of places we have that. So we know what basically happens at that moment. Okay. But because of his injuries at that moment, from his being whipped and scourged, unable to carry that beam to that place, okay? And I want you to understand something. It's so funny. You know, it always get a kick. I appreciate people showing what that might be like, carrying that cross. Okay, I appreciate the good work on that. All right. But how many times have you seen the guy walking on the side of the road carrying a 4x4 that has a cross across it, which is another 4x4, which are really light lumber compared to what Jesus carried? A 4x4 on a deal with a little tiny wheel at the very back because he's walking from, I don't know, Burkeville to Jasper, and he wants people to see Christ as it was in his day carrying it. But they got that little bitty wheel on the back of it, so as he's carrying it, he's actually got help of that wheel down there. It ain't dragging it. He's carrying it. I laugh every time I see that, and I thought, boy, they need to read their Bible more, because if they did read their Bible more, they'd know better about what that actually was like. And there wasn't nothing like that. What it was like was this: an 8x8 beam, approximately 8 to 10 foot long. They didn't carry the top section. They were always at the cross. The up and down section was always at the cross. They carried the cross beam. You were tied to that cross beam, both like this, an 8x8 beam, anywhere from 8 to 10 foot long, and I can tell you after carrying lumber all the days of my life, it's about 80 to 100 pounds. Except I got to carry it on my shoulder. I'd go down and get about half of it, get it on my shoulder when I was carrying creosote ties or railroad track ties, and then you could do half and half and at least put you a towel up there to kind of help along that way. No, that's not what was happening with Jesus. Jesus was tied to that. It was hanging off his back, through the back of his arms. And he had to walk the best he could to the cross, trying to get there the best he could. That'd be like you putting it's sort of like being in the army, I guess it'd say, Ben, wouldn't it? Putting an 80 and 100-pound rucksack on the back of your back and then hucking up that field, except you get to do it with your arms down and holding on, a little bit. His is wide open, holding all that weight backwards. It's almost like they're being stretched backwards in a lot of ways. It was meant, to be honest with you, it was meant to get them so near death so that when they got to the cross, they didn't take too long dying. It's meant to stress them, all right? So here is Jesus. He's doing the best he can, but he gets to some point, and they get to realizing, those fellas, as William said, he's going to be tonight before he gets to that cross. We better do something about it. So they enlist Simon the Cyrene to carry that cross beam, not like Jesus was carrying it, but the easiest way to carry it was probably like I did lumber. I throwed it on my shoulder and walked, or throwed it underneath my arm if I could and walked with it. Okay? But the amazing thing in saying all that was Jesus didn't tell him not to. He didn't say, no, I'm going to carry it. I did all the rest of it. I'm going to do all the rest. No. He didn't say a word. He'd let Simon carry that beam to the cross where he'd be crucified. Because of his injuries and his being whipped and scourged, not being able to carry it all the way, it was allowed, and Jesus think about it. Here is the God of all creation, because he's man, but he's God also. Here is the God of all creation that had probably grew the tree. The tree was grown by him, if it were not for that. Here is the God of all creation allowing little old man to minister to him as he went to the cross. Little old man. So you know what? If you're serving God and you're doing for God and you're doing everything you're supposed to do for God, God bless you. But if you think you're not supposed to be ministered to from time to time, I got news for you. If our Savior was not spared, you're not going to be spared. We have to accept being ministered to from time to time. We have to accept that that's a part of our lives. Here's my point. Jesus didn't tell him no. When I was a kid and I'd read the Bible and I'd read the story of Simon the Cyrenian, I would always say, if I was there that day, I'd have carried that cross for him. I'd like to think I was better, than all that other. I said, I'd carry it for him if I was there. They did him wrong. But the truth of the matter is, you've got to admit that all of us have done him wrong, even to be saved in life. All of us have to admit we're sinners in need of being saved by the Savior. We're all both minister and ministered to in some sense. Must have rejoiced in the fact that Simon I'm not sure about what Jesus might have been. Now, Jesus knew a lot of things. But I got to thinking about Simon as he began to pick up that beam for him, as he had to release at least to some of the distance, not being carrying that heavy beam all the way to where he'd be crucified at. I imagine in my mind, as I think of Christ, I imagine he wasn't too sorry about seeing Simon there. I imagine he'd like Simon carrying that beam just a little ways for him, even though he was going to be killed on it, not Simon. I've lived long enough to know that even the strongest of Christians will time to time bear their own cross for Christ. I've learned in my own life that bearing a cross for Christ just comes along with life. And just as we are to hear God's voice, because that's what the law teaches us, to hear his voice, to do the work that needs to be done with our hands, to walk in the ways that God would have us to walk. Just like that is true to do those things, to do those by example each and every day, it is also true that we must rest from time to time. Because life is too hard not to rest from time to time. And listen, don't be caught off guard at that moment when you're getting ministered to, when you've been doing ministry all your life. What you ought to do is thank God that you walked in his steps and was able to do the things he wanted you to do for so long. Now you're going to walk in his steps and need a little help along the way till the end. All right? All right. The problem is, we think that's a sign of weakness. It's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign of the truth. It's very seldom you get out of this life not having anything happen. Very seldom. That you have it so perfect that everything's great, and then somehow you die real quick, and you get out of this life without any whatsoever. It's very seldom that happens. The truth is, as ministers of God, because the law teaches us in a lot of ways to know that, as ministers of God, Jesus come to fulfill the truth of what that actually is. And what did he fulfill? Well, he fulfilled this. While yet you were sinner, he died for you. And he ministered to you. He set the example, right? Now we minister to others, right? But we shouldn't be afraid of the fact that we get ministered to, because even God himself needed help. Even God himself, as he walked, needed help. It shouldn't be something that we're shy about. I would say it ought not be something you're ashamed about if you're having a downtime, if you're going down a little bit and your health ain't where it used to be. It's nothing to be ashamed about. Even Jesus got down. That's a pretty good example. That's a pretty good example. Let's stand as our ladies come and bring us a song of invitation.